Kent Hovind,
Well,
if you
thank for
don't
joining
know,
us.
is a sovereign citizen as well. Kent Hovind believes that the whole straw man thing that sovereign citizens believe, he believes that. So much so that he, like, sold videos telling people how to do it. For those of you who don't know, Kent Hovind is basically a con man. And that's my opinion. In case he wants to sue me like he's trying to sue the federal government for $500 million. Sham Rockstar, thanks for the 25 bits. And look at this dog and cat, thanks for the 100 bits.
There's nothing funny about the tools of capitalism.
So here he is with some dude trying to explain why the laws don't apply to you, even though they very clearly do. Squid with 1,000 bits! Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. This, if I ever debate Hovind again, I want it to be on this sovereign citizen nonsense. I've covered creationism pretty thoroughly, but I am so much more interested in his, like, BS sovereign citizen nonsense.
This is kind of an
Because it's how he got to prison.
informal discussion on redeeming the straw man. My name is Kent Hovind. With me is John D'Arcy from South Florida. Thank you, John. Nice of you to drive all the way up to visit us here in Pensacola. America's in trouble. We have a lot of people confused about what's going on. This will be just kind of an informal discussion about a variety
Death Lee,
of
thanks for
topics,
continuing
but
your
where are
subscription.
our rights? Our founding fathers said, "Behold these truths."
Let me see if I can find a better version of this without the hum.
They're endowed.
Redeeming the straw man.
Basically, God created the universe.
It's a little
We've got a
better,
little chart here
maybe.
behind me that kind of explains.
Oh shoot, I
God
lost it.
created people. States are supposed to be supreme. States' rights.
Do-do-do-do. Do-do-do-do. Okay.
Well, thank you for joining us. This is kind of an informal discussion on redeeming the straw man. My name is Kent Hovind. With me is John D'Arcy from South Florida. Thank you, John. Nice of you to drive all the way up to visit us here in Pensacola. America's in trouble. We have a lot of people confused about what's going on. This will be just kind of an informal discussion about a variety. It ties on a variety of topics, but where are our rights? Our founding fathers said, "Behold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Rights that you just can't
Old enough to
put a
know
limit
more
against."
better. Thank you
And what we
for
want to try to
gifting
do is
a
just
sub.
explain
Appreciate that.
where we lost it and how to get it back. Just try to keep it simple so folks like me can understand it. Basically, God created the universe. We've got a little chart here behind me.
2.5 minutes left on the
God
level 4 hype train.
created people. This would be Kent Hovind, John D'Arcy, John Doe, etc., etc. We, the people, got together 200 years ago and created a state government. All of those states got together and created a federal government. And the federal government is supposed to be the servant to the state government.
All right, so here are some of the problems. Okay? First of all, you have no evidence for the first part in this chain. You say that God created people. You need to evidence this God, which you've never been able to do, and I've seen plenty of your material, Kent, so you already have a issue in your chain of power. Then we have people. People created state governments. That's correct. And then the state governments got together and created a federal government. That is correct, yes. And then the federal government created the corporate federal government. Here's where you're losing people, because no, that's not the case. The United States government is not a corporation. Kirthin with 100 bits. All I know is that there's nothing funny about the tools of capitalism. True. Thank you, Baja, for 15 bits. I appreciate it. A minute left. 67% of the level 4 hype train. Will we do it?
States are supposed to be supreme. States' rights.
No, states are not supposed to be supreme, Kent. The supremacy clause of the Constitution says that the federal government is the supreme authority within the United States, and the states are subservient to it. The states have plenty of power in regard to things that aren't like monopolized by the federal government. So we see things like driver's licenses and stuff that, of course, the state governments take care of, and there's tons of, state laws everywhere that are dealt with by the states instead of the federal government. But if the federal government has a rule on anything, it is supreme, and the federal government takes precedent over the state government. You'd think you could have done even a little bit of research before you made this video. Oh boy, MW1642, thank you for 200 bits. Squid with 1,000 bits, thanks so much. And Happiness is mandatory with 300 bits. So many bits, it's like a bit party. 25% of level 5. Let's see if we can get to level 5 today. That'll be fucking amazing.
Which goes into a long story of the wrong side winning the Civil War, right?
Exactly, what was it?
Oh! Kent Hovind saying the wrong side won the Civil War. The side that won was the one that got rid of slavery, and the one that lost was the one that wanted to keep slavery. Jesus, Kent. I already thanked you. Okay. Yeah. Sick.
The Civil War.
What was the Civil War? It's Abe Lincoln's war. It wasn't the Civil War.
That's right. It wasn't slavery.
It wasn't slavery.
It was about slavery, you idiot. It was about states' rights. The states' rights to do what? It's about slavery. You can look at the secession, articles from the various states and the constitutions of the various states that seceded from the Union, and many of them include slavery as part of their constitution. This revisionist history lost cause BS is so ridiculous.
Slavery, no. And then the federal government created a corporate federal government. Notice it's all capital letters.
No, there's no corporate federal government. I get it. Corporations are bad. I agree. But there is no corporate federal government. That's made up. Either you're making this up, the guy you're sitting next to is making this up, or you've both been conned by an even bigger person who's conned you. Either way, in this chain, there's someone somewhere conning you into believing that. And I'm guessing it's you, Kent. I'm guessing the guy that you're sitting next to came up to you and was like, hey, so you already talked to people about creationism. So of course they're, not the brightest bulbs in the box. And a lot of them are pretty gullible. So why don't we use your platform to sell them a video to try and tell them why they don't have to pay taxes? And then you and I can profit off of it. And then we'll make a whole bunch of money. And Kent Hovind, being the scam artist that he is, went, yeah, this'll go well. Unfortunately, Kent Hovind seems to buy his own BS, which is why he wound up in prison for the better part of a decade for cheating on his taxes.
The corporate federal government created a corporate state government.
Nope.
And one of these two, somewhere in here, created persons with all capital letters. This would be Kent Hovind with all capital letters. This is not me. Which leaves us with an interesting situation. Since whatever God creates, he controls, and we're supposed to be subservient to God, whatever we create, we control, and the states, the federal
Look at this dog and cat with 100 bits, another 100 because I've been dying for you to watch this one. Thanks.
But whatever the government creates,
minute and a half
it controls.
Left on the hype train.
So the government has created persons, actually a corporate soul, for every individual.
No, they haven't, Kent. There is no such thing as this straw man that you're going to spend the next hour talking about. When you get a birth certificate, it's literally just a certificate of your birth. It's just a record that says you, the person, the individual, was born on this date at such and such place, and your parents or whoever is on the birth certificate. That's all it is. It isn't some magic corporate personhood document. It's literally a certificate of your birth.
Individual being in the United States. There's a corporate Kent Hovind and a corporate John D'Arcy.
No, there's not. Not unless you actually create corporations and call them after yourself, but even then, it's not some sort of, straw man version of you. It would just be a corporation with your name, which is not something that exists automatically for anyone.
And they can pass all sorts of rules and regulations for their corporation, which they own and control and regulate, etc. Now, they're using my name, though. They created a corporation and chose
20
my
seconds
name to go
in
on
the
there
hype
and
train.
chose your name to go on one and everybody else's name to go on one. So they've kind of abused their privilege and stepped out of their delegated authority and used my name. So that leaves me with four
No,
choices.
they're not. It's still your name, Kent.
Tools of capitalism.
Take. Number one, I can
Iron
do what
Gullet
they
with
say,
200 bits. Thank
which
you
is
very
what
much.
most Americans do. The state government can tell their person, you must wear a seatbelt when you drive your car. They can tell this person, you must...
Kent, the government can tell you what to do because you're a citizen of the country in which you reside. That's why. And because there's this thing called the social contract that all of us are a part of in any society in which you live. And when you're born in that society, you have rights and you have, responsibilities. Those responsibilities include following the laws of the land. We live in the United States, where luckily we have the ability to vote on representatives to go make the laws. And if we don't like those laws, then we can vote for people to go and change them. Or if we think that there's something unconstitutional or illegal about a law, we can take it to court, we can take it to the Supreme Court, and then try and get it struck down judicially. But either way, as an individual, the law is the law because the government of the land has created it, and you are beholden to that government because that government is sovereign. Often that sovereignty is backed up by a myriad of factors, up to and including things like consent of the governed. This is something that's big in the United States, the idea that the power of the government derives from the consent of the governed. Now, this doesn't mean that every individual person needs to consent to every law. All it means is that, on the whole, people in the country recognize the government, the federal government or the state government, as the official government. And then the second thing that makes the state sovereign is the fact that it can back up its sovereignty with physical force. The military, the police, all sorts of different levers of power that they could use to keep people in line if they don't follow the law. That's what makes something sovereign. You don't need to create some corporate person or whatever to impose laws on people. You just need to be the government. It's not even just that your belief is stupid, Kent, which it undoubtedly is. It's that it's ridiculous and superfluous. The government has powers over you, regardless of whether or not there was this fake corporate, straw man person. It's the government, Kent. How do you think the government works? Do you think back in the day, let's say, I don't know, England prior to the Magna Carta. The king is the most powerful and sovereign. They're the sovereign of the country because they're the absolute end-all, be-all leader. Let's say that they're levying taxes against people in the country, because taxes, basically, in any civilization are something that happens. The form of the taxes and the amount is going to be different, but at the end of the day, taxes are taxes, and they exist pretty much everywhere there's a functional government. Do you think that the King of England had to come up with some sort of fake corporate straw man to get his subjects in order to... Wait, did someone... What happened? Oh, a Trump person in the chat. Gross. You don't need a corporate person to have the government impose taxes on you. What you need is to be the government that can back up its authority through either force, in the case of something like a place where there's a monarchy, or through the consent of the governed. It's pretty simple. You don't need this corporate personhood thing.
File an income tax form. You must get a Social Security number. You must get a driver's license. You must get a birth certificate, etc., etc. And they have the right to tell that to this person. So I can either say, okay, I'll do what you say. I can bring myself from here all the way down and submit myself under these corporations. Or I can try to cut the string between...
Here's the kitty, by the way.
This we the people, and the artificial we the people. I can try to cut that string. And some people do that with varying degrees of success. Number three, I can look for loopholes in the laws and say, well, wait a minute, this law doesn't require that I do this. And some people, with varying degrees of success, look for loopholes and say, wait a minute, the state...
Varying degrees of success. How successful do you think your application of this belief was, Kent, when you went to jail for a decade? Not very successful, would be my guess.
state does not require persons to file a tax form unless they are a drug dealer from the Virgin Islands or live in Washington, D.C., or use a zip code, and all sorts of different arguments have been used, and some not too successful.
None have been successful. No one has ever gotten in front of a judge anywhere in the country and made a successful argument as to why they don't have to pay taxes, or that the laws don't apply to them up to and including tax law. That's not how it works.
Choice number 4 is claim this guy. Say, hey, you're using my name. That's mine. I want it. That's what I want John to explain to us today. How do we redeem that straw man? And what does that mean, redeeming that straw man and moving him or claiming him as your own? John, tell us about that.
Well, redemption is basically very biblically grounded.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, God, I want to see that book, Sovereign Citizens in the Bible.
And it is the soul of the Christian's belief.
This is Kent pre-jail. So this is before he got caught for doing all this stuff. And then once he did get caught, of course, he went to prison. I can find a quick article about it. Kent Hovind prison. Just gotta look for his legal problems. On August 15th, 2002, Hovind was arrested for assault, battery, and burglary. Oh, this is a different incident, but let's read it anyway. In 2002, Hovind was arrested for assault, battery, and burglary in an incident with an CSE secretary. The charges were dropped in December. On September 13th, 2002, Hovind was charged with a failure to observe county zoning regulations for Dinosaur Adventureland, a misdemeanor. April 2006, the Dinosaur Land buildings were closed by county officials, and the Florida Circuit Court found the owners in contempt, offering fines of $500 each day buildings were used. Hovind argued he did not need a permit due to the nature of the building, but after a 5-year court battle over the $50 building permit on June 5th, 2006, Hovind pleaded nolo contendere. Is that like no contest, basically? I do not. Oh, yeah, no contest. As charged to 3 counts: constructing a building without a permit, refusing to sign a citation, and violating the county building code. Hovind paid fines totaling $675. Squid with 50 bits, the gospel of the sovereign. True. I'd read that. Anyway, here's the federal civil tax matters bankruptcy and renouncing citizenship, 96 to 2006. Hovind was originally reported to the IRS by Pensacola Christian College senior vice president Rebecca Horton in the mid-90s after she learned of Hovind's anti-tax stand. Hovind's organization had neither business licenses nor tax-exempt status, nor was it considered a church by the people who worked there. The ministry's organizational structure was described by the United States Tax Court as appearing to be based on various questionable trust documents purchased from Glenn Stoll, a known promoter of tax avoidance schemes, leading the court to conclude that Hovind used these trust documents as well as other fraudulent means to conceal the ownership and control of his activities and properties. This is called, oh boy, this came up in the Tiger King documentary. Unlawful transfer, more or less. If you're trying to conceal your assets that you own by signing them over to someone else, that's a crime in and of itself. You're not allowed to do that. Am I an anarchist or a socialist? I'm a socialist. He just threw a tantrum and had to pay more, basically, yeah. According to the IRS, Hovind earned $50,000 a year through speaking engagements, and in 2002 alone, CSE sold more than $1.8 million in merchandise. On average, Hovind made bank deposits in excess of $1 million a year, and eventually that grew to about $2 million a year. After half that income went to employees who were salaried or were paid hourly wages, Hovind derived substantial revenue from these activities that appeared to be income to him personally. Thurizzi, thank you for following. Welcome to the stream. He has an anti-tax stand. Is that its ability? Tax van. On March 1st, 1996, Hovind filed Chapter 13 bankruptcy petition to avoid paying federal income taxes, claiming he was not a citizen of the United States and that he did not earn income. He's a citizen of the United States. He claimed that a minister, everything he owned belonged to God, and he was not subject to paying taxes for doing God's work. The funny thing is, too, if he just registered the organization as a non-profit religious organization, he'd be fine. He'd be fine. A lot of this would be fine. If he did this the proper way, he still wouldn't have to pay taxes on a lot of things. There'd be some stuff, and probably his personal income taken from the non-profit, but at the end of the day, a lot of the things that you do as a non-profit aren't taxed, and that's the entire purpose of a non-profit organization, and he'd probably have a pretty good case for being a non-profit, considering it's like a religious outreach organization, more or less. But he doesn't want to do that for some reason. On June 5th, 96, the court dismissed Hovind's bankruptcy case, finding he had lied about his possessions and income. The court upheld the IRS's determination that his claim was filled in bad faith for the sole purpose of avoiding payment of federal income taxes. He called Hovind's arguments patently absurd, is also said that the IRS has no record of the debtor ever having filed a federal income tax return. Oof. In 98, the IRS requested account information from Hovind from an internet provider after Hovind made claims on an internet broadcast about his own tax law non-compliance, going back to the 70s when the provider initially balked. The courts granted a subpoena on the basis that the IRS could demonstrate that Hovind had received income but had filed no income tax returns going back to 1991. In 2003, Hovind would tell the New York Times, "I haven't filed a tax return in 30 years, which is a very stupid thing to say, even if it's true. Hey, Baha, in the bedroom, there's some Tums on the side table. Could you bring me those? That brownie was an awful choice. Ugh, it's tearing me up. On May 13th, 1998, Hovind had his wife filed a power of attorney and revocation of signature document in Escambia County, which would nullify any of their promises, debts, or legal agreements made prior to April 15th, 1998. Hovind's claim that they had signed documents, you know, you get it. I'm not going to read this whole thing. I think I've read many of these before. No, it was just like a normal brownie. It was just like just a brownie with some Reese's Pieces in it. It was alright. A little too sweet, honestly, but it was fine. Anyway, on July 11th, 2006, Hovind was indicted on 58 counts in the District Court of Northern Florida, Pensacola. That's a crazy number of indictments. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Do you only have 3 hats on?
No, I thought I had 4. 1, 2... Oh, I didn't put the 4th one on. Where's the holographic hat? Oh, here it is. Boop. Sorry, I cheated you all out of a hat. Apologies.
I love you.
Love you too.
Hello, chat.
At arraignment, Hovind claimed incomprehension of the charges, telling the court, quote, "I still don't understand what I'm being charged for and who is charging me." That'd be the federal government, Kent. The federal government for tax evasion. The presiding magistrate judge asked Hovind if he wrote and spoke English, to which Hovind responded, "To some degree." You know what? Based on reading Kent Hovind's dissertation that he got his fake doctorate from, I agree. His English ability is to some degree. I wouldn't call him fluent. Baha Bits. Thanks for the 100 bits. Sorry. Dead air. The trial began October 21st, 2006. Hovind hoped to convince a jury that his amusement park admission and merchandise sales over $5 million from 1999 to 2004 belonged to God and could not be taxed. By the way, Hovind isn't the only person who's ever tried to make this argument. Surprise, surprise. It's never worked. Evidence produced at the trial revealed that Joe Hovind had requested financial assistance. Oh, the serfs! Hey, welcome! Thanks, Lance. Welcome. We're looking at Kent Hovind's tax evasion stuff. Kent Hovind of, I guess just creationism fame is also a sovereign citizen. And we're reading him going to jail and also watching a video he made prior to his conviction about how he thinks you don't have to pay taxes.
That's right, capitalistic propaganda.
Anyway, after closing arguments were presented on November 2nd, the jury deliberated 3 hours, which is nothing, before finding Hovind guilty on all counts, 58 for Hovind and 45 for his wife. The Pensacola News-Journal said the saddest thing, had they cooperated with agents, they probably wouldn't be worrying about prison sentences now. Thank you everyone who's following. I really, really appreciate it. Raid Kamazotz later. He's doing a charity stream and needs the eyeballs. Kamazotz. Okay, will do. Everyone in the chat, remind me when the stream ends to do that. So back to the video. So Hovind believes that he did nothing wrong. Of course, he evaded taxes for like a decade. And got away with it for a while, but then he's putting out videos like this where he thinks he don't have to pay taxes. No wonder people caught him.
We ultimately, our souls are redeemed through Jesus Christ. And all we have to do is accept his finished work on the cross, and we are eternally redeemed. And Christ then protects and holds our soul for all eternity. So it's very biblically based, and it's funny that no matter how corrupt things seem to be getting, government seems to follow God's law. You ever wonder why every 7 years you can file a bankruptcy and not 12? Or
why 7? Just, sure. Yeah.
You know,
Let's find out the real reason so we can debunk whatever made-up reason Hovind is going to have. Why can you file bankruptcy every 7 years? To prevent the abuse of the bankruptcy process, the bankruptcy code requires a certain amount of time to pass between cases that result in a discharge. This prevents people from running up high credit card balances and other types of debt and filing bankruptcy every few years. Yeah, but why? Why 7, right? Why 7 years?
That's right, capitalistic propaganda.
Between bankruptcies. Whew. My typos are just wild today. Longest amount of time between cases required 7 years. Why, though? I want to know why. Just a lot of people asking whatever. Either way, I don't know exactly why, and I'm not going to spend a ton of boring time looking for you guys, but I'd imagine, again, it's just a period of time so you're not abusing it. I'd imagine there's some, like, judicial or, like, legislative reason they came to in their research that 7 years was the amount of time that would be appropriate. Maybe that's the amount of time it would take to sort of get your affairs back into order and reasonably get your credit score up and, like, not be able to abuse the system, more or less.
The Bible talks about things like that in your Jubilee and things like that. And there's another principle about giving your fellow man notice and grace. And a lot of people might say, well, why?
The only good thing about Hovind is he put a video that he was straight up breaking the law. Yep.
In Africa who never saw the Bible and expect him to have knowledge of Jesus Christ. And Isaiah talks about how God has given everyone notice. Then shall it be for a man to burn, for he will take thereof and warm himself. Yea, he kindleth it and breaketh bread.
There's an old joke, I think, that goes something along the lines of, a missionary goes to, like, the deepest jungles in South America to go and find an unreached tribe that has never heard of Jesus Christ. And he's talking to the people there, and he teaches them about Jesus Christ and how that they'll go to hell if they don't get saved. and the person who's like the chief of the tribe says something along the lines of, but wait, if we had never heard about Jesus, would we still have gone to hell? And the priest says something like, no, you would be fine. God doesn't judge you. He bases it on the content of your character if you don't know about him. And then the chief says, then why did you tell us? I find that kind of funny.
Yea, he maketh a god, and worshipeth it. He maketh it a graven image, and falleth down thereto. So we see one type of man that looks at God's nature, and he does not marvel at it, but he has rejected God's general revelation as opposed to object it, in stark contradiction with what David does.
Yeah, David looked at himself and said, I'm fearfully and wonderfully made, in the book of Psalms,
In fairness, David also saw a woman bathing on a roof and then sent her husband to war to get killed so he could bang her. So let's not maybe take David as the number one reference you should say when talking about the Bible.
And as a biology teacher, I would agree, all you got to do is study anything about human anatomy or biology, and you'll say, man, we are fearfully and wonderfully made. One cell more complex than a space shuttle.
Amen.
It's unbelievable,
How are you saying that? You cannot compare like a biological thing like a cell to a spaceship and try and say one is more complex than the other. They do completely different things. But even if you were to say, okay, a cell has this many like complex parts and a spaceship has this many complex parts, however you're going to arbitrarily decide those factors, the cell has had hundreds and hundreds of millions of years to evolve. We've only had spaceships for under 100 years, so not exactly a one-to-one thing, Kent.
The best thing man can build is, God builds trillions and trillions of them,
Yeah. So we got the two type of people there, and so man is not without excuse that God has testified to man, and if man accepts God's general revelation, then God is faithful and he will send him specific revelation, meaning the Bible and knowledge of Jesus Christ. So the heathen that's out in the middle of the jungles in Africa who does not have a Bible, he will be held accountable to the revelation and knowledge he has, meaning nature. So that is a very basic principle of law that we have to give notice and grace. And just as God gives us notice and grace, in the law, would anybody be surprised to find out that there are very elements of notice and grace?
Get to the tax stuff. There we go.
The other...
Wait a minute, so you're saying it's in God's economy or God's plan or God's character, give notice of what you expect.
That's right.
And what you want.
That's right.
And then
Thanks for
the
following,
grace
Yankee.
is a time period in which to accomplish this?
That's right.
Okay.
Okay. And the other concept that I see here is we've got a mirror, okay? And we have God, and he's perfect, he's holy, he's just. And the flip side to that...
What notes is Kent taking right now?
And he is
I'm imagining an insert shot where he's just drawing boobs.
What is holy and what is just. Right? He's evil. And God, only God can create real, tangible things. Paper,
sure,
and
matter,
wood,
time,
and,
right.
Not really. I mean, what do you mean by that? I mean, yeah, there's the, fact that you can't create or destroy matter, but we don't have any evidence for anything being created out of absolutely nothing. Even, the Big Bang, as far back as we can see, comes out of a singularity, right? There's nothing that we know that creates anything. We just repurpose things.
So, Satan cannot. So all he is left doing is counterfeiting. And he's a great counterfeiter. And that is the other principle that we find out here in the straw man, is that whatever God created, Satan's got his counterfeit too. And man turns around and man created real de jure government.
What about human-made elements? I'd imagine those, you're still taking, particles, right? when you like artificially create elements in a lab, I think what you're essentially doing is adding or removing electrons, because that's what differentiates different elements from each other, is the number of electrons in them. So if you're creating an artificial element, all you're doing is forcing another electron in or out of a system, right? You're not actually creating something new. Oh, sorry, protons. My bad. You're not actually creating, like, you're creating a new element by recombining and changing the amount of things in it, but you haven't actually created anything new. You're just moving particles around. And I say just. It's obviously, like, an amazing scientific feat to be able to do that, but, like, it's not the same as creating something out of nothing. Like, Star Trek, what are they called? Star Trek, they Earl Grey tea, hot, replicators. Replicators, like, don't even create something. They're basically taking atoms and recombining them in different ways, right? So that's kind of what, like, creating a new element is like, but in a very, very rudimentary, relative to something like a sci-fi show way. You're just recombining parts of atoms to create new things. You're not actually creating atoms out of nothing.
The government turned around and created a fiction. And I like to think of the state, in fact, when we start talking about government, when I mention the word state, I think of the state that is created in the womb, mankind.
Okay.
That is real government. And our founding fathers said, there is where the basis of all government,
Sure, the Founding Fathers... Oh, God, I hate talking about the Founding Fathers because people fetishize them so much. Our governmental system is more or less at principle level, at the very least, if not at practical level, enforced by the consent of the governed, right? Our government, at least in theory, exists because we as citizens allow it to continue to exist. It was put together by a group of people who, again, weren't representative of the entirety of the population, not by far, but nonetheless, at the very least, foundationally speaking, the idea is that the people of the place in which they are governed should consent to the government. Of course, in practicality, a lot of this is enforced by, like, the military, the police, the threat of imprisonment, all those sort of things. But at the end of the day, the government is the government of the place in which you live. It's not super complicated. Kent and this dude are trying to scam people and try and get all philosophical about, like, government. And that's an interesting thing to do and talk about, like, political theory. But at the end of the day, you and I can argue all day about if the government is, like, legitimate or whatever. But at the end of the day, the cop's still gonna give you a ticket if they pull you over for speeding. You know what I mean? Like, the fact that you're like, ooh, actually, I don't think the state government or the federal government has power over me because actually I don't consent to their rule. All right, let's see how it goes for you.
It's held within mankind.
Right.
The executive, legislative, and judicial.
Even in Genesis chapter 10, after the
Bojuka
flood, God told
Bob,
Noah,
thank you for following.
He established government. He said, whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed.
That's a great point.
You're right.
And we have
You're okay
our
with fetishizing the founding
theology,
fathers as
and we
long
have
as it's
covenant theology.
as long as it's kinky
And
Hamilton
a lot of times I
fanfic.
meet people who want to throw away covenant theology.
Agree.
And say we're under dispensational theology. And then other people that want to say there's no dispensations and they're all covenant theology. And the other point that I think is important is we can't sit here and say, well, we're under grace, let's throw law out. Because very clearly, law does apply in our life. If you don't believe so, go jump off a 10-story building. You'll find out how quickly law applies.
The law of gravity is applying constantly, right?
A circle has 360 degrees.
Well,
At least Kent isn't a flat earther. I swear, that's like the one grift he isn't into. He's into creationism, he's into sovereign citizen stuff, but he's fine with gravity. And unfortunately, in the year of our Lord 2020, I have to give him credit for that.
whether you like it or not.
Exactly.
Right, sure.
So, but law does not affect our justification. Okay? But if we keep certain laws, we might live a lot longer and be healthier.
Get to the tax.
apply because will so said about today. License they'll never pocket. No, never told McDonald's friend. Okay, if we were to go out today and just start building a McDonald's franchise, but we never paid our license fees and we never told McDonald's about it. We just figured they got millions of stores, they'll never know. We could probably get away with that and keep going.
I wonder how long. Now I'm curious. Someone should do this. Build a McDonald's somewhere and make it as identical to a McDonald's as you can, and see how long it takes for McDonald's corporate to notice. Would it be like a week? Would it be a day? Would it be a month? Like, there's so many. There's not like McDonald's enforcers driving around being like, let me see your license. If you just built a McDonald's somewhere, it's entirely possible you could get away with it for a while if the food quality was on par with McDonald's and tasted about the same.
And sticking the money in our pocket. Now, most Christians I know would probably say, ooh, John, that's very unethical. Right? But as long as we didn't get caught, we could get away with it. Okay? In essence, that's what's happened to us. They have created a straw man, and they are using this entity. And as long as we don't show up to say, hey, you can't do that, they're going to go keep on using that.
No, there is no straw man. So for those of you who came during the raid, sovereign citizens and people like Kent Hovind who believe this stuff basically believe that the government, on the day of your birth, not only are you born as a real flesh and blood individual, but on that same day, there is basically a straw man version of you created. This is like your birth certificate and your social security number. They believe that it's a corporate fiction that exists in order to, like, enforce law upon you. Which doesn't even make sense, because again, the government has power over you due to a variety of factors, including consent of the governed, and not you as an individual. I'm talking about the consent of the society as a whole, and the fact that the government is sovereign because it has power, police, military, to enforce its sovereignty, right? Why would the government need to make a fictitious you in order to rule over you when they already do, just de facto, right? Like, why would I need to be like, oh, in secret, I'm going to create this legal fiction? Ha ha ha! Why would you have to do that? It's superfluous. It makes no sense. It is just a bunch of extra work when the government already has power and jurisdiction over you because you live here. Even if you weren't a U.S. citizen, the law still applies to you if you're in the U.S. Like, if you're French and you come here from France and you're on a vacation and you get pulled over for speeding, you can't just say, well, I'm French, the law doesn't apply to me. Wherever you are in the world, if there's a government that enforces laws, if you are there under their jurisdiction, they have power over you.
Funny about the tools of capitalism.
Antipodian squid, rather, with 50 bits, best evil laugh. I was trying to channel a little bit of King George III from Hamilton.
Since they created this and used your name,
That's right.
as long as you don't say anything, well,
They keep
they're
going.
going to keep using it, sure.
And it gets worse than that because
The
we put
McDowells
ourselves
from Coming to America.
Look, being a McDonald's.
I don't want to get DMCA'd, actually. Screw it.
People, we got this little misunderstanding. See, they're McDonald's. I'm McDowell's. Huh? They got the golden arches. Mine is the golden arcs. Now, see, they got the Big Mac. I got the Big Mick. We both got 2 all-beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, and onions. But they use a sesame seed bun. My buns have no seeds.
Funny movie.
out of a position where we are accountable to God, and we come on down and we say, we will become that person for you. And we take ourselves out of a position of being their master and put ourselves in a position of
Being the
becoming
servant.
the servant.
Have churches done the same thing by becoming incorporated?
That's a very interesting issue.
Kent Hovind hasn't registered. I don't know if he has at this point, again, after his, decade-long prison sentence. But at least prior to his prison sentence, he had not registered his church, his organization, whatever you want to call it. It's not really a church. I'd more call it either a broader thing, like a ministry, sort of like Living Waters has a ministry that's Ray Comfort's thing, or if you want to like talk about Ken Ham's Creation Museum, that's part of his ministry. Either way, you could register yourself as a non-profit religious organization and get away with not paying a lot of taxes, because that's the entire purpose of these non-profits, is to like say, hey, we're not trying to make money, we're trying to do a thing for either religious or charity purposes. And that's fine, you know, I don't necessarily have a problem with that. I'd rather the churches get taxed, but, like, at the end of the day, as long as it's, like, applied equally to every kind of church, I guess whatever. That's not the hill I'm gonna die on, at least not today. It's an issue that's not at the top of my list of things to hate. He could get away with avoiding so many taxes if he just registered his stuff as a non-profit religious organization, but he refused to, and thought that he could just say, oh, I don't make any profits. All the money I make is actually God's money. You can't do that. Really? Can you have God appear in the courtroom today and testify to that? If so, please, then yes, we'll let you off. But until such a time as you could prove that the money that's been given to you and that you are spending on your own livelihood is God's, then you're gonna go to jail. Like, wouldn't you also, if that were true, if that were your legal defense, shouldn't you be on trial for stealing from God because you used that money to buy yourself clothes and food and a home? It's ridiculous.
It's a 501c3 corporation. There's a U.S. Supreme Court case named Hale v. Hinkle. And in that court case, they basically stated that a corporation is a creature of the state.
Okay.
All right? Let's follow this analogy through with an illustration. Let's take your phone number, for instance.
Okay.
Who owns that phone number?
Good question. I guess I have to pay every month for it, so the company owns it.
So the
I'm
phone
renting.
company.
You have access to that phone number. You're paying access to the phone number, and it's being applied to your residence, but you don't own it. The company owns it, correct?
Basically,
Yeah.
if we stop meeting our contractual obligation, mainly paying our phone bill,
They'll take it away and give it to somebody else.
exactly,
Sure,
and,
right.
and you'll see how long that phone
Right.
number is yours.
30 days.
All right. So the same thing with a corporation. A corporation is a creature of the state. Okay. You have to apply to the state. Okay. You fill out all these articles in the corporation, and it has to be follow the guidelines that the state sets. All right. Once they get these articles in corporation, and you pay a fee to the state, they will stamp that thing in, and you become a corporation.
That's true. I've done this before. When Jake and I were starting out on YouTube, probably not even starting out, but at some point when it became like an actual business, we filed for an LLC. We have an LLC here in Michigan. I still have the paperwork around here somewhere. But legally, yeah, you can get certified as a corporation, and it's not like the most complicated thing in the world. Anyone can make an LLC. It's pretty simple. You just get a lawyer, and they'll fill out the paperwork for you. I think it costs something like $200 for us to file the paperwork. It wasn't that bad. And yeah, like anything, you need to follow the laws once you are a corporation. It's fine. There's nothing nefarious about it.
All right. But they've got some, just like that phone bill, they've got some.
We'll move on
guidelines
to
you
something
gotta
else
follow.
soon, by the
You
way.
gotta
We're not going to
file
watch this
tax
whole
return
thing in
every
one
year.
shot, because
You
it's
gotta
very long and a bit
file
dry.
minutes. You've got to pay a fee every year to use that corporation. And if you don't pay your fee every year, you can't even defend a lawsuit that comes along. So,
Yeah, that's the entire purpose. It's you have to continue to pay to register yourself as a company year over year. That's part of it. I mean, again, you're like, if I break the law, then I can't use the law to protect me. Like, well, yeah, that's the point. You got to follow the rules to make sure that you stay registered as a corporation.
corporation is the creature of a state, and it does not exist as a matter of right. See, God never created corporation, but it is down in this world existing as an entity of privilege. And who ultimately owns that corporation? Well, the state.
Whoever created.
No, you own a corporation. Like, if you have an LLC, like, for instance, like Jake and I have, then you file people who are, like, managing members of the LLC. Technically, like, when I file, like, how do I put this? Like, when I applied for a home loan and I bought this house, and of course I've been able to do that, thankfully, because of all the fine people who support us through stuff like this stream and YouTube and everything. the way that I show them that I have income is showing previous year's tax statements. And then when I file, or when they have like a line for like, what is your like occupation? If it's just a general thing, I'll put like entertainment or something, because that's basically what we do, or like online, whatever. But if they're looking for like job title, because I make my money through the company, through the LLC, you write like, because Jake and I are both managing members of such and such LLC. I'm not going to tell you the name of the LLC because it's not relevant to you people, and I don't need you looking up my business. But you put managing member, such and such LLC, and that's my official job title. And then when I apply for things, that's what it is. I own that collectively with Jake. Jake and I are 50-50 partners in that LLC. That's how that works. The government doesn't own it just because that we filed it with the government. We are owners of that LLC.
The state created it, so they own it.
If it's Utah or California or Florida, and the stockholders basically have a beneficial interest in the
No, we have an LLC, not an LLP. I don't know the differentiation. Our lawyer just recommended an LLC for whatever reason. It's been quite a few years. I don't know.
Corporation. The state owns it. So now, when they come in, and I believe, Kent, that this is just around the corner, and a lot of churches are going to get really caught off guard by this, but I think they're going to be very shortly saying, well, you have to have, if your church has 3,000 members, you're going to have an equal pro rata share of queer ministers on staff.
Sure.
And if you don't have a queer minister, they could
What?
revoke that tax status.
No one's gonna force you to have an LGBTQ whatever minister. You just can't have hiring practices that are discriminatory. This is a problem the Creation Museum actually had. They were doing discrimination against employment. They like wouldn't hire people who weren't Christian, and that was a problem. But yeah, if you're going to be an employer in the United States, you have rights, but you also have responsibilities. And as an employer, one of your responsibilities is to not have discrimination in your hiring practices. If you don't want to do that, sorry, you don't get to be a corporation. Welcome to the real world, where you both have rights and responsibilities.
And you want to say, well, man, isn't that unconstitutional?
No, not really. They created it.
Yep, and it's just like that scenario with McDonald's, okay? If you want to sell Grandma Hovind's 1 pound hamburgers, you can do that. But once you enter into a franchise agreement with McDonald's, you can't sell Grandma Hovind's hamburgers.
I have to sell what they tell me to sell.
You have to,
Right.
exactly.
Okay, but that's not analogous to the United States. The United States is not a McDonald's land corporation that's going to force you to do certain things to be a franchisee. Making an LLC or any sort of corporate entity is not the same as being a franchisee of the federal government. They're not even close to legally the same thing. This guy has no idea what he's talking about.
So if we have left our position with God and we have elected to become this corporate franchise, and they say you will have queer ministers, at that point in time, I think as Christians, it becomes a matter of, are we going to honor our contracts?
Yes.
Jesus, these guys are the worst. Okay, that's enough of that for today. Let's go to the next